Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's edition of Cosmic Capacity. Today we are talking about the upcoming Mercury retrograde, so what it actually means, how it shows up in real life, and most importantly, the horoscope for your rising sign. And I do kind of want to ground this video at the very beginning and say that Mercury retrograde is not the chaos that the internet often makes it out to be. You know, Mercury retrograde happens 3 to 4 times a year. But it is a time to slow down and reevaluate and just revisit some things that maybe you've let linger and now it's time to clean up. It's a great cleanup time. And so in this video, we're going to talk about what to expect based on what's happening in your chart because this retrograde goes through 2 signs. So Mercury is going to retrograde through the sign of Sagittarius from November 9th to the 19th. So that will be its own set of themes. And then the 19th to the 29th, Mercury will be retrograde in Scorpio. And so let's take a look at your chart together. We're going to start with Aries rising, of course. And so this Mercury retrograde from Sagittarius to Scorpio is from your 9th house to your 8th house. And so when this retrograde begins in Sagittarius, it's going to bring review around your goals, travel. If you're traveling during this time, major heads up here. Like you want to give yourself space, compassion, bring a phone charger, all the things. And then it's going to move back into Scorpio, which is your 8th house. And that's going to be a totally different focus of emotional depth, shared resources, trust, intimacy, grief, fear. Like 8th house is heavy. And so themes to be thinking about is big picture plans or ideas might just feel a little unclear. You may second guess a trip, a project, or something that you were planning to share publicly. And when Mercury does make that move into Scorpio, that reflection shifts from those outer goals to really kind of your inner truths and what you've got going on the inside. And so in that portion of the retrograde, you could revisit a financial agreement. You could be talking through sensitive topics with a partner. Or even noticing old fears around control, trust, or being fully seen. Like those sorts of things can pop up for you. And so some things to try out if you're an Aries rising, revisit old projects or courses instead of signing up for something new. Hold off on big financial moves. Double and triple and then maybe even quadruple check your travel plans and your schedules before you confirm, and really kind of just write, move, or talk it out when emotions feel heavy, because when it moves into Scorpio, it can definitely feel heavier. Taurus risings. This Mercury retrograde from Sagittarius to Scorpio is from your natal 8th house to your 7th house. And so when this retrograde begins in Sagittarius, the first half, it's going to bring some revisiting and some reflection around shared resources, money, emotional boundaries, grief, fear. And then when it moves back into Scorpio, your 7th house, that's going to highlight communication and really just like understanding in your closest relationships. Any kind of one-on-one partnerships, sometimes even some like legal agreements can fall in the 7th house. And so themes for Taurus rising during this Mercury retrograde is you may need to revisit financial agreements, intimacy dynamics, or how much you are giving and receiving in partnerships. And remember, please expand your view past just romantic partnerships. It can be work partnerships, your therapist, etc., professional partnerships. And when Mercury moves into Scorpio for you, conversations really take center stage and misunderstandings might surface for you. And you might realize where some more honesty is overdue. And so some things to try for Taurus rising is reviewing any joint finances or contracts before you commit to anything new. Notice where you might be avoiding uncomfortable topics and practice naming those things and getting more comfortable with them. Reconnecting with a partner, a friend, a collaborator that maybe you've lost sync with. And then really kind of listening first and clarifying second, especially if emotions are running high, which they can be when this retrograde starts and it's in your 8th house. Gemini rising. Your Mercury retrograde from Sagittarius to Scorpio is from your natal 7th house to your 6th house. And so the retrograde begins in Sagittarius, which is your 7th, and that brings attention to your one-on-one partnerships, your relationships, your commitments, your collaborations, sometimes Legal contracts fall there as well, but any of those like one-on-one dynamics, that can even be a therapist, it can be professional relationships as well. And then it's going to move back into Scorpio, which is your sixth house, and that's going to shift the focus to kind of your daily routines and your health and your workload. And so some themes you might see popping up are rethinking how you show up in partnerships, really in regards to what feels mutual and what doesn't feel mutual for you. And when Mercury moves into Scorpio, that reflection gets a lot more practical. And so you might be noticing communication gaps at work, old habits resurfacing, or the need to streamline how you manage your time and your energy here. And so some things to try or think about during this retrograde are revisiting conversations with partners or coworkers instead of jumping to any conclusions, reorganizing your calendar, your inbox, your workspace before you add on any new commitments, paying attention, please, to your body signals if stress or burnout or anything like that is creeping in for you. And really, I think the biggest one here is clarifying expectations with others than making any kind of assumptions. Cancer rising. This Mercury retrograde from Sagittarius to Scorpio is from your sixth house to your fifth house. And so when this retrograde begins in Sagittarius, which is your sixth, it brings reflection for you around your daily routines, your health habits, your work responsibility, very much like your day-to-day. And then it's going to move back into Scorpio, your fifth house. And that's going to spotlight creativity, joy, self-expression, children if you have them or have them in your life, dating if you're dating. And so themes here for Cancer rising is you may notice disorganization, scheduling issues, burnout early on in the retrograde. And then once Mercury shifts into Scorpio, the focus turns to what actually fuels you. And so you might be revisiting or rethinking an old creative project, or how you spend your free time, or how much just like joy and play you allow yourself. You may be rethinking things in the dating department, that can be a little bit more seventh house, but really also your children as well if you have them. And so some things to try out, Cancer rising, are reworking your daily schedule to make space for things, reviewing your health routines, cutting out anything that doesn't feel sustainable to you, revisiting any creative ideas that you've put on hold, or maybe even just sharing something in public that you've been keeping private. If you are a parent, like reconnecting with your kids through play instead of any kind of like rigid productivity or anything like that. And let yourself rest or play without turning it into another task. These are great things to review for you throughout this retrograde. Leo rising, this Mercury retrograde from Sagittarius to Scorpio is from your fifth to your fourth house. And so when this retrograde begins in Sagittarius, your fifth house, it brings some revisiting and some reflection around creativity, joy, self-expression, children if you have them, dating if you're dating, and then moves back into Scorpio, your fourth house. And that's going to highlight home themes, family, your private life, your roots, your emotional foundations. And so you might start this retrograde by rethinking how you're sharing your voice or spending your free time, how you're having fun. You know, a creative project could slow you down, or you might be second guessing and revisiting what feels fun and fulfilling for you, those fifth house topics. But then when Mercury moves back into Scorpio, attention is going to shift to your personal life. You know, it could be home repairs, like it could be that literal family conversations or dynamics. You know, maybe you have some emotional roots that really kind of need some revisiting. And so some things to try out, Leo rising, are revisiting any unfinished creative work or brainstorming without pressure. That's huge. You know, spend a night at home cooking, decorating, organizing instead of overbooking your calendar. Check in with any family or roommates if communications fell off. And maybe you're going to go through some old photos or some old memories that remind you who you are and where you've come from. Virgo rising, this Mercury retrograde from Sagittarius to Scorpio is from your fourth house to your third. And so when this retrograde begins in Sagittarius, your fourth house, it does bring reflection and some revisiting around home, family, your emotional roots, your private life, really just like those emotional foundations. And then it's going to move back into Scorpio, which is your third house. And that spotlights communication, learning, day-to-day interactions. And so you may start by rethinking your living situation, home projects, or how supported that you feel by family. And then when Mercury moves back into Scorpio, that focus shifts to themes of your schedule and your communication style. Can also bring up siblings as well. And so you might need to slow down and double check some messages or revisit a conversation that didn't really land the first time. And so some things to try are finishing up any small home projects, decluttering before we take on anything new, reconnecting with family or siblings potentially, reviewing travel routes or appointments so nothing slips through the cracks. That's huge during a retrograde. Maybe going through some old notes or emails or ideas to see what is still worth pursuing. And take a short break from constant texting or social media if your mind is feeling cluttered here. Libra rising, this Mercury retrograde for you from Sagittarius to Scorpio is from your 3rd house to your 2nd. And so this retrograde begins in Sagittarius, which is your natal 3rd house. And it's going to bring some reflection around communication and your voice, short distance travel, your siblings potentially if you have them, daily mindset. And then it's going to move back into Scorpio, your 2nd house, shifting that focus to money, values, and self-worth. Themes that you might start to notice are miscommunications, tech hiccups, mental overload from juggling too many details. And then when Mercury moves back into Scorpio instead, the attention turns to how you manage your resources and your time and your finances. And this can be a super valuable time for you to reassess what feels worth your effort and what isn't. So slow down before you hit send on any texts or emails. Review your budget and your spending habits. Look for any small course corrections you could be making. Back up important files and double check any travel or meeting logistics. Say no to tasks or commitment that drain more than they give you. And last tip here is to even consider having a short daily journal to get those scattered thoughts out of your head. Scorpio rising. This Mercury retrograde from Sagittarius to Scorpio is from your 2nd to your 1st house. And so when this retrograde begins in Sagittarius, your natal 2nd house, it brings reflection around money, security, your self-worth, what you value. Then it's going to move back into your 1st house, which highlights identity, confidence, your direction, how you communicate, like who you are. And so you might start off this retrograde by reviewing your finances or noticing where you maybe been overextending your time and your energy. And then when Mercury moves back into your sign, it becomes a bit more personal and you can feel more introspective, rethink how you're presenting yourself, or realize maybe somewhere that your voice hasn't been fully heard and it needs to be heard. And so some things to try out Scorpio rising during this retrograde are reviewing spending and unsubscribe or cancel anything that doesn't feel aligned anymore. Pause before you make any big purchases or commitments. Maybe even update your social media bio, your headshot, anything that kind of represents who you are publicly. Practice saying what you actually mean, even if it feels uncomfortable, and give yourself extra space to think before responding in any sensitive conversations that might pop up. Sagittarius rising. This Mercury retrograde from Sagittarius to Scorpio is from our 1st house to our 12th. And so this retrograde begins in our sign in Sagittarius, our 1st house. And that does bring some reflection and some revisiting around identity, self-expression, and how we communicate our ideas. Then it's going to move back into Scorpio, which is our 12th house. And that shifts the focus to more rest, reflection, healing, what's happening behind the scenes. And so as we start this retrograde, we may start by second guessing how we're showing it publicly or noticing confusion around plans or decisions. And then when Mercury moves back into Scorpio instead, that energy really gets inward and we might be feeling quieter, more introspective, more aware of what's draining us mentally, emotionally, all the ways. And so some things to try or some things to consider during this retrograde is delay launching any new projects until after if you can. It's okay if you can't. Just know you might be revisiting them. Reflect on your goals privately. Pay attention to any gut feelings, patterns, dreams that are popping up once we kind of get to that 12th house portion. Give yourself extra rest and alone time if you're not feeling your best, because you might not be. Things in the 12th house feel inherently harder. And clear up any physical or digital clutter to help your mind slow down a little bit. Capricorn rising. Your Mercury retrograde from Sagittarius to Scorpio is from your natal 12th house to your 11th. And so when this retrograde begins in Sagittarius, that is your 12th house, and it brings some reflection and revisiting around boundaries, healing, rest, what happens behind the scenes. Then it's going to move back into Scorpio. And when it does that, we're going to be highlighting totally different themes of friendships, community, long-term goals. And so some themes here that you might be experiencing, you're definitely probably going to feel a little bit more inward at the start of the retrograde. Quiet time, solitude, sleep might become extra important as your mind is really processing those things in the background. And then once Mercury moves into Scorpio, attention shifts to your social circles, your collaborations, old friends, group projects, shared visions. They may all start to suddenly resurface for review or even repair. So some things to try out during this retrograde are blocking off extra downtime early in the retrograde to avoid any burnout, reconnecting with friends or networks that you've fallen out of touch with, reviewing any group plans, event details, contracts before you commit. Notice if any of your goals right now feel outdated or like they need a new direction. And journal or talk through emotions that surface instead of brushing them off. It's a great time for this. Aquarius rising. Your Mercury retrograde from Sagittarius to Scorpio is from your natal 11th house to your 10th. And so when this retrograde begins in Sagittarius, your 11th, that brings reflection around friendships, collaborations, long-term goals. And then it's going to move back into Scorpio, which is your 10th house. And that turns your focus to revisiting things around career direction, reputation, public identity, how you show up in the world. And so when we start this retrograde, you may be reevaluating team dynamics or noticing changes in your friend group or your community roles. And then when Mercury moves back into Scorpio, attention turns to work and visibility, and you might be revisiting professional plans, redoing something that you shared publicly, or getting clarity about how you want to be seen in your field. And so some things to try out and consider are reconnecting with professional contacts or mentors who inspire you, revisiting your long-term goals and asking whether they still feel aligned for you, reviewing work emails or projects for accuracy before we submit, clarifying expectations with supervisors, clients, collaborators, and taking time to update your portfolio, your resume, your website with any recent wins you've had. And then our Pisces risings. This Mercury retrograde from you, from Sagittarius to Scorpio, is from your natal 10th house to your 9th. So when this retrograde begins in Sagittarius, so your 10th house, it brings reflection around career direction, goals, public image, and then moves back into Scorpio, your 9th house, which highlights education, travel, and that big picture vision. And so you may start this retrograde by rethinking or revisiting your professional path, or feeling a little bit uncertain or unclear about how you're being seen at work. Projects might slow down, they might need an extra round of edits. And then when Mercury moves back into Scorpio instead, your focus kind of expands, and you could be revisiting plans for travel, higher learning, publishing, or re-examining what you truly believe in. Some things to try out and consider are reviewing your professional goals and know what now feels out of alignment for you, touching base with any mentors or supervisor before you make big career decisions, revisiting a class, a course, or a book that maybe once helped shift your perspective and now maybe you want to revisit. If you are planning travel, double and triple check everything, have backup options, bring your phone charger, be prepared. And last but not least, reflect on what success means to you versus what it did a year ago, and how has that evolved, and are you at the right spot to get the success that you're looking for today. And so that wraps up our Mercury retrograde horoscopes. And if this breakdown helped you feel more grounded going into the Mercury retrograde, make sure that you subscribe to Cosmic Capacity, our channel here, for weekly astrology videos that help us make sense of this stuff in real life. Like, how is this showing up in the real world? And if you love talking about astrology in a way that's easy and real and fun, come hang out with us on the Cosmic Group Chat podcast too. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.